They laughed before I even reached the table. Not the polite kind of laughter people use to mask discomfort, but the sharp, careless sound of certainty. The kind that says the outcome has already been decided. My half-sister Serafina didn't bother hiding it. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and whispered something to my stepmother Evelyn that made them both smile. Across from them, their attorney adjusted his cufflinks and shook his head slowly, as if watching a child wander into traffic. I stood alone at the petitioner's table with nothing but a legal pad and a pen. No attorney, no entourage, no whispered strategy sessions. Just me. The bailiff called the room to order, but the smirks didn't fade. They thought this was a formality, a performance where I would play my assigned role, the inconvenient daughter, the emotional footnote, the woman who never belonged in the Hale family empire. They expected me to fold, to panic, to embarrass myself. They didn't know that every laugh in that room was already outdated. Because while they were busy rehearsing my defeat, I had spent months listening, recording, reading, learning exactly how power lies when it thinks it's safe. And when I finally stood up to speak, the first sentence out of my mouth didn't sound like desperation. It sounded like a confession they weren't ready to hear. The courtroom fell silent in a way that had nothing to do with the gavel. It was the sound of people realizing they might be standing on the wrong side of the story. The air inside Department 39 felt colder than it should have. Not because of the temperature, but because of the way everyone avoided looking at me. Clerks shuffled papers. A court reporter adjusted her headset. Even the judge took an extra moment reviewing the docket, as if delaying the inevitable discomfort. Hale Dominion Estate versus Miranda Hale. My name looked small on the page compared to the machinery sitting across from me. Evelyn Hale wore black, tasteful and severe, like a woman already in mourning for something she had lost control of. Her hair was immaculate, silver streaks arranged to suggest wisdom rather than age. She didn't look at me. She never did, unless she needed to remind me of my place. Serafina, my half-sister, looked bored. 29 years old, dressed like a magazine spread, tapping manicured nails against the table. She had grown up knowing she would inherit the world. I had grown up knowing I would be tolerated at best. And then there was Gregory Vanton. If arrogance had a uniform, he wore it well. Perfect posture, perfect smile. Decades of courtroom victories pressed into the lines around his eyes. Gregory had represented senators, oil magnates, pharmaceutical giants, people who didn't lose, people like my stepmother, people who expected me to vanish quietly. The judge finally looked up. Judge Lawrence Whitmore. Old school. No patience for drama, but an even deeper dislike for dishonesty. Appearances, he said. Gregory rose smoothly. Gregory Vanton for the respondents, Your Honor, representing Mrs. Evelyn Hale and Ms. Serafina Hale. The judge nodded, then turned his gaze to my side of the room. And for the petitioner? I stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, an ugly sound that echoed more than it should have. I felt every eye snap toward me, curiosity mixing with pity. Miranda Hale, I said, representing myself. The pause that followed was not subtle. Judge Whitmore's eyebrows lifted slightly. Gregory's smile tightened. Serafina actually laughed out loud this time, covering her mouth too late. Evelyn finally looked at me. Her eyes didn't hold anger or fear. They held disappointment. Ms. Hale, the judge said carefully, this matter involves substantial family assets, corporate control, and multiple trust instruments. Are you certain you wish to proceed pro se? I am, Your Honor. You understand that you will be held to the same standards as licensed counsel? Yes. And that any procedural mistake could permanently harm your case? Yes. He studied me for a long moment. Very well. Gregory leaned toward Evelyn, whispering with confidence. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the meaning. This won't take long. Mr. Vanton, the judge said, your opening statement. Gregory stepped forward like a man walking onto a stage he owned. Your Honor, he began, voice smooth and reassuring. This case is, at its core, unfortunate but simple. Richard Hale was a visionary. He built Hale Dominion from a regional manufacturer into a global enterprise, employing tens of thousands. In doing so, he established a clear and comprehensive estate plan. He gestured lightly toward Evelyn and Serafina. That plan entrusted his wife and younger daughter with continuity and stability. Unfortunately, the petitioner, Ms. Miranda Hale, now seeks to disrupt that plan based on personal grievances, rather than legal merit. He turned slightly toward me, not quite looking at my face. She alleges exclusion, betrayal, favoritism. But the law does not govern feelings, it governs documents. Gregory lifted a binder thick enough to break a wrist. The will, the trust amendments, the corporate bylaws, all executed properly, all verified. He paused for effect. Ms. Hale was provided for. She simply did not receive what she believes she deserved. Serafina smirked openly now. We will show that this action is an attempt to rewrite history and punish those who upheld Mr. Hale's wishes. We ask the court to dismiss the petition in its entirety. Gregory returned to his seat, satisfied. The judge turned to me. Ms. Hale, keep it concise. I stepped forward slowly. I didn't go to the podium. I stood where I was, hands resting lightly on the table. My father died on a Tuesday, I said. Gregory frowned. The judge didn't interrupt. He had lunch plans that day, I continued. He canceled them. He told his assistant he wasn't feeling well. By Friday, the board announced his sudden passing. By Monday, my access to the family offices had been revoked. I looked directly at Evelyn for the first time. And by Wednesday, every document that reflected my father's original intent had been replaced. Gregory stood abruptly. Objection, argumentative and speculative. Overruled, the judge said. She may continue. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I'm not here because I feel excluded, I said. I'm here because my father's estate was altered under circumstances that no longer align with coincidence. Serafina scoffed. This is embarrassing. I ignored her. My father did not disinherit me, I said calmly. He protected me, and the proof of that protection is what scared them enough to rewrite everything after he died. The courtroom was very quiet now. I will show that assets were moved into offshore structures without disclosure, that trust amendments were executed while my father was medically compromised, and that efforts were made to undermine my credibility by questioning my mental fitness. Gregory laughed, sharp and dismissive. Your Honor, and, I added, I will show that my father anticipated all of this. The judge leaned forward slightly. On what basis? I took a breath. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, but my voice didn't shake. On the basis that he recorded it. That did it. Gregory shot to his feet. Objection! This is absurd! Serafina's smile vanished. Evelyn's hands tightened around her purse. The judge raised a hand. Ms. Hale, what exactly are you claiming? I'm claiming, I said, that my father documented his concerns about undue influence, asset concealment, and what he believed were deliberate attempts to isolate him from me. I let the silence stretch, and that he asked someone he trusted to safeguard that documentation until it was needed. Gregory's face went pale in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. This is a fishing expedition, he snapped. She has no counsel, no authentication, no— Sit down, Mr. Vanton, the judge said quietly. Gregory froze. I will decide what has no merit. He sat. Judge Whitmore looked at me with new eyes now. Not sympathy, not skepticism, interest. Ms. Hale, he said, this court will allow you to proceed, but I caution you, allegations of this magnitude require evidence, not implication. I understand, I said. Inside, I felt something settle into place. They had spent years telling me I was emotional, reactive, too sensitive. They never noticed how carefully I watched when they thought I wasn't worth performing for. The judge set the schedule for the day's proceedings. Motions, exhibits, witnesses. As the court recessed briefly, Serafina leaned toward me, her voice low and venomous. "You really think you can do this alone?" she whispered. "You don't belong here." I met her eyes. "I know," I said. "That's why you're scared." Her smile didn't return. Across the room, Gregory spoke urgently to Evelyn. His confidence had cracked just enough to show something underneath. Doubt. And as I gathered my papers, I thought of my father's last voicemail. The one I had listened to 100 times before I ever set foot in that courtroom. "If they laugh, Miranda, let them. People only laugh when they're sure the truth can't reach them." He had been wrong about many things in his life, but not about this, not even close. The first break came 15 minutes later, and it felt like the room exhaled without me. People stood, chairs scraped. Conversations erupted in low, urgent bursts. Across the aisle, Gregory Vanton was already in motion, his head bent toward Evelyn, one hand slicing the air as he spoke. Serafina hovered close, eyes darting between them, her earlier confidence replaced by something brittle. I stayed seated. Bernard Clay slipped into the chair beside me as if he'd always been there, as if the years since my father's death hadn't pushed him into the shadows on purpose. He wore the same gray suit he always had, conservative to the point of invisibility, the kind of man powerful people forgot until it was too late. "You did exactly what he hoped you would," Bernard murmured without looking at me. I didn't answer right away. My hands were steady on the table, but inside everything was still humming. "They're adjusting," I said. "Gregory didn't expect the word recorded to come out this early." Bernard nodded. "He built his career on controlling narratives. You just told him there's one he doesn't own." Across the room, Evelyn glanced over. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Bernard. That was new. She hadn't noticed him before. Good. The bailiff called us back to order, and the conversations died mid-sentence. Judge Whitmore settled into his chair, gaze sharp now, not bored. "Ms. Hale," he said, "before we proceed further, the court will require clarification regarding your access to any alleged recordings. This is not a criminal proceeding yet, but the implications are serious." "Yes, Your Honor." "Explain how these materials came into your possession." I stood again. This time, the scraping of the chair sounded different, louder, heavier. "My father trusted very few people," I said. "Fewer still when his health declined." Gregory rose halfway out of his seat. "Objection. Relevance." "Sit," the judge said flatly. Gregory sat. "Richard Hale kept detailed records," I continued. "Not because he was paranoid, but because he understood leverage. He believed in documentation." I glanced at Bernard. Before his hospitalization, he instructed his executive assistant to duplicate certain files and store them off-site. When she was dismissed abruptly, those files were transferred to Mr. Clay. Bernard stood when I nodded to him. "That is correct, Your Honor." Evelyn's composure cracked for half a second. It was subtle. Anyone else might have missed it. Judge Whitmore studied Bernard. "And you complied with this request?" "I did," Bernard said, "at Mr. Hale's insistence." Gregory stood again, more forcefully this time. "Your Honor, this is hearsay layered upon hearsay. There is no authentication, no chain of custody." "That will be addressed," the judge said. "Sit down." Gregory's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. I continued. "The materials include emails, drafts of trust amendments, and voice recordings made by my father himself. He was concerned about undue influence." Serafina laughed, sharp and nervous. "This is insane. My father adored our mother." The judge shot her a look. "Ms. Hale, you will refrain from commentary unless sworn." Serafina flushed and fell silent. I turned back to the bench. "I am not asking the court to accept these materials at face value today. I am asking for the opportunity to present them." Judge Whitmore leaned back, fingers steepled. "You will have that opportunity. But I warn you, Ms. Hale, if these allegations prove unfounded, the consequences will be significant." "I understand," I said. I wouldn't be standing here if they were. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, calculated. Very well, the judge said. The court will hear preliminary testimony regarding the estate's recent amendments. Mr. Vanton, call your witness. Gregory stood slowly, smoothing his jacket, reclaiming his posture inch by inch. The respondents call Margaret Lowell. A woman in her early 60s approached the stand, posture stiff, eyes forward. Margaret Lowell had been the family's private attorney for years, before Gregory absorbed her firm into his own. She knew where the bodies were buried. Ms. Lowell, Gregory began smoothly, you served as legal counsel to Richard Hale, correct? Yes. And you supervised the execution of the final trust amendments? I did. Were those amendments made voluntarily? Yes. Was Mr. Hale of sound mind at the time? Yes. Gregory smiled faintly. No further questions. I stood. Margaret's eyes flicked toward me just once. There was something there. Regret, maybe. Or fear. Ms. Lowell, I said, how long did you represent my father? 22 years. And in that time, did you ever observe him make significant financial decisions without consulting at least 2 independent advisors? She hesitated. No. Yet the final amendments were executed with only you and Mr. Vanton present. Is that correct? Gregory shot up. Objection. Mischaracterization. Margaret swallowed. Yes, she said quietly. So, no financial officer, no board oversight, no independent medical evaluation? That is correct, I nodded. Ms. Lowell, was my father hospitalized at the time? Yes. Sedated? Yes. Gregory slammed a hand on the table. Your Honor. Enough, the judge snapped. Ms. Hale, proceed carefully. I am, I said. I turned back to Margaret. Did you inform my father that the amendments would effectively remove my voting rights within Hale Dominion? Margaret's voice wavered. I explained the documents as instructed. By whom? Silence. By whom, Ms. Lowell? Margaret glanced at Gregory, then at Evelyn. By Mrs. Hale, she said. The room shifted. Evelyn stood abruptly. This is outrageous. She's twisting. Sit down, Judge Whitmore said, his voice cold. Ms. Lowell, did Mr. Hale ask for these changes himself? Margaret closed her eyes. He did not initiate them. Serafina gasped. Margaret, what are you doing? Gregory looked like he might be sick. I let the moment breathe. Thank you, I said softly. No further questions. As Margaret stepped down, Evelyn leaned forward, whispering furiously to Gregory. He didn't answer. The judge called for a short recess. In the hallway, reporters clustered near the doors, murmuring into phones. Bernard guided me toward a quiet corner. You just put a crack in their foundation, he said. I know, I replied, but it won't hold unless we widen it. Gregory emerged moments later, his face tight. He ignored the press and walked straight past us, Evelyn and Serafina trailing behind. As he passed, he stopped. You are playing with things you don't understand, he said quietly. You think this ends well for you? I met his gaze. It already has. He smiled thinly. Confidence suits you. It won't save you. When the court reconvened, Judge Whitmore addressed the room with a gravity that hadn't been there that morning. This court has heard enough to justify further examination of the circumstances surrounding the Hale estate amendments, he said. Ms. Hale, you will be permitted to submit your materials for review. Mr. Vanton, your objections are noted. Gregory nodded stiffly. I am also ordering a temporary freeze on any additional asset transfers pending review. Serafina jumped to her feet. You can't do that. The judge fixed her with a look. I just did. The gavel came down, and for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt something shift. Not victory, leverage. As the room emptied, Bernard leaned close. They'll retaliate. I know. They'll go after you personally. I know. He studied my face. Are you ready for that? I thought of the nights I'd spent alone after the funeral, listening to my father's recordings, hearing the exhaustion in his voice. The fear, the resolve. "I've been ready longer than they realize," I said. Outside, the sky had darkened. A storm was rolling in, and somewhere between the thunder and the whispers, the story they'd written for me was finally starting to tear. The storm broke sometime after midnight, and I was still awake when it did. Rain hammered against the windows of my apartment, sharp and relentless, as if the city itself was trying to scrub something dirty off its streets. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee, my father's old leather notebook open in front of me, its pages warped from age and use. I hadn't planned on opening it again tonight. I told myself I needed rest, clarity, distance. But distance was a luxury I could no longer afford. Bernard Clay had left an hour earlier, after insisting I double-lock the door and silence my phone. "They're not used to resistance," he'd said, his voice calm but weighted. "When people like Evelyn feel cornered, they stop playing by etiquette." I believed him. Evelyn Hale didn't survive 3 decades beside my father by being sentimental. I turned another page, dates, initials, short, precise notes written in my father's careful hand. He never wasted words. Every line existed for a reason. I traced my finger along one entry, my chest tightening as I read it again. Pressure increasing. Evelyn pushing Gregory harder. Wants changes accelerated. I said no. Another page. Medical consult scheduled without my request. Cancelled it myself. They don't like that. I exhaled slowly. This was why they'd moved so fast after his death. Why I'd been shut out before the ground over his grave had settled. These notes weren't the ramblings of a confused man. They were the observations of someone who knew he was being maneuvered, and who knew exactly by whom. My phone buzzed. I flinched before I could stop myself. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring. It stopped, then buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Miranda," Evelyn's voice said smoothly, as if we were discussing lunch plans instead of dismantling each other in court. "We need to talk." "It's late." "That never stopped you from calling your father." The words hit exactly where she intended them to. I closed my eyes. "What do you want?" I asked. "This circus has gone far enough," she said. "You embarrassed yourself today. You embarrassed the family." "You mean I embarrassed you?" A pause, just long enough. "You're making dangerous accusations," Evelyn said, "against people who have protected you your entire life." I laughed once softly. "You've never protected me." "That's not true. I kept things stable." "For who?" "For everyone," she snapped, the mask slipping. "Do you have any idea what chaos you're inviting? Hale Dominion employs tens of thousands of people. Investors are nervous. Boards are whispering. You think they care about your feelings?" "This isn't about feelings." "Then what is it about?" she demanded. I looked down at my father's handwriting. "It's about truth." Silence stretched on the line. Then Evelyn sighed, the sound heavy with practiced disappointment. "Gregory can make this go away," she said. "Quietly. You walk away with a generous settlement. More than your father ever intended, frankly." "There it is," I said. "You'll never win this," she continued. "Not alone, not against us. Let this end before you hurt yourself." I imagined her sitting in her perfectly curated living room, phone pressed to her ear, convinced she was still the adult in the room. "I'm not walking away," I said, "and you should stop calling me." She lowered her voice. "You've always been fragile, Miranda. Don't prove me right." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the table. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with me. I pushed the notebook away and stood, pacing the small apartment until my breath evened out. This was what they did. They pressed where it hurt, then acted surprised when you bled. The next morning, the courthouse steps were already crowded when I arrived. Cameras, microphones, reporters calling my name like they knew me. I didn't stop. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Word had spread. Clerks watched me with open curiosity now. A few nodded as I passed. It wasn't support exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either. Bernard met me outside the courtroom, his expression grave. "They filed a motion late last night," he said quietly as we walked. "Emergency petition questioning your mental fitness to proceed." I stopped. "They're actually doing it?" "Yes." "On what grounds?" Bernard's mouth tightened. "Emotional instability, estrangement, alleged history of anxiety." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "They're trying to discredit me before I can present anything else." "They're trying to neutralize you," Bernard corrected. "If they convince the court you're unreliable, nothing you submit matters." The bailiff called us inside before I could respond. Gregory was already on his feet when the judge entered, his confidence carefully rebuilt. Evelyn sat serenely beside him, hands folded, the picture of concerned restraint. Serafina looked almost bored again, scrolling on her phone until Gregory shot her a warning glance. Judge Whitmore took his seat. "We're here on the respondent's emergency motion," he said. "Mr. Vanton." Gregory stepped forward. "Your Honor, given the petitioner's decision to represent herself while making increasingly erratic claims, we believe the court has an obligation to assess her competency." I clenched my jaw. He continued, "Ms. Hale has demonstrated emotional volatility, a fixation on conspiratorial interpretations of routine estate planning, and a documented history of anxiety treatment." Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. It was almost impressive. "This is not an attack," Gregory said smoothly. "It's a safeguard." I stood. "Your Honor—" "Sit down, Ms. Hale," Gregory snapped. "You'll have your turn." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You don't control the room, Mr. Vanton. Proceed." Gregory nodded stiffly. "We are requesting a temporary suspension of proceedings pending a psychological evaluation." Serafina finally looked up, interest flickering in her eyes. Judge Whitmore turned to me. "Ms. Hale, your response." I stood slowly. The room felt smaller, tighter. "They are asking you to silence me," I said. "Not because I'm unstable, but because I'm inconvenient." Gregory scoffed. "Speculation." "No," I said louder now. "Strategy." I took a breath. My father anticipated this exact move. Gregory stiffened. He documented concerns that his wife and legal counsel would attempt to undermine my credibility if I opposed posthumous changes to his estate, I continued. He took steps to preserve evidence independent of family control. I reached into my bag and placed a flash drive on the table. "This contains a series of recordings made by my father in the final months of his life," I said, "including statements addressing his mental clarity and his fear of being declared incompetent." Gregory shot to his feet. "Absolutely not. There is no foundation for—" "Enough," Judge Whitmore said sharply. He looked at me. "Ms. Hale, were these recordings made voluntarily by Mr. Hale?" "Yes." "Were they made in a private residence?" "Yes." "Do they contain statements relevant to this motion?" "Yes." The judge considered for a long moment. "I will allow the first recording to be played," he said. "Limited purpose only." Evelyn's composure cracked. Her fingers tightened around her purse. The bailiff took the drive and connected it to the court system. A moment of static filled the room. Then my father's voice emerged, clear and unmistakable. "If you're hearing this," Richard Hale said, "it means I didn't get the chance to stop them myself." A ripple went through the gallery. "I am of sound mind," he continued. "I know exactly what I'm doing. And I am recording this because my wife and her attorney have begun pressuring me to make changes I do not agree with." Evelyn's face went white. "They believe Miranda can be managed," my father said. "Discredited, labeled unstable. That is false. My daughter is the only person asking the right questions." Serafina's mouth fell open. "I trust Bernard Clay with these materials," my father concluded. "And I want it on record that if my competence is questioned, it is not because I lack it, but because someone wants me out of the way." The recording ended. The silence afterward was suffocating. Judge Whitmore removed his glasses slowly. "Mr. Vanton," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "this motion is denied." Gregory didn't speak. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "any further attempts to impugn the petitioner's mental fitness without substantial evidence will be met with sanctions." Evelyn's shoulders sagged, just slightly. I sat down, my heart pounding, my throat tight. This was only the beginning, I knew that. But they had overplayed their hand. As the court recessed, Bernard leaned close. "You didn't just survive," he whispered. "You turned their weapon around." I looked across the room at Evelyn, who refused to meet my eyes now. "No," I said quietly. "I reminded them why they were afraid of my father." And for the first time since this began, I saw something like fear ripple through the people who had always believed themselves untouchable. By the fourth day, no one laughed when I walked into the courtroom. They watched instead. Every step I took across the polished marble floor echoed louder than it should have, not because the room was bigger, but because the air was tighter. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, phones slipped quietly into pockets. Even the reporters lining the back wall lowered their voices, as if sound itself had become evidence. Evelyn was already seated when I arrived. She looked composed, but not confident. Her posture was rigid, hands folded too neatly in her lap, chin held just a fraction too high. Serafina sat beside her, scrolling through her phone with forced indifference, but her knee bounced under the table. Gregory Vanton stood apart from them, reviewing documents with an intensity that bordered on panic. The immaculate armor he wore so well now showed seams. Bernard walked in just behind me and leaned close. "They filed another motion at dawn," he whispered. "This time it's about financial scope." I nodded. "They're trying to narrow the battlefield." "Yes," he said, "because they don't want you showing the whole map." The judge entered, and the room snapped to attention. Judge Whitmore didn't waste time. "We are resuming the Hale Dominion estate proceedings," he said. "Ms. Hale, you may call your first witness." Gregory stiffened. I stood. I called Bernard Clay. A ripple moved through the gallery. Bernard adjusted his jacket and walked to the stand with steady steps. He didn't look at Evelyn. He didn't look at Gregory. He looked straight ahead, raised his right hand, and took the oath. Gregory was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, Mr. Clay's testimony is irrelevant to the trust instruments under review. He is neither a beneficiary nor a medical professional." Judge Whitmore looked unimpressed. "Sit down, Mr. Vanton. Relevance will be determined after the testimony." Gregory sat, jaw tight. I approached the stand slowly. Bernard met my eyes, calm, reassuring. "Mr. Clay," I began, "how long did you work for my father?" 31 years, he answered. "The last 12 as his senior executive assistant." "And during those years, were you involved in managing confidential financial information?" "Yes." "Were you responsible for maintaining records related to Hale Dominion's subsidiary structures?" "Yes." Gregory shifted in his seat. "Mr. Clay," I said, "did my father ever discuss concerns about asset transfers occurring without his approval?" Bernard inhaled once. "Yes." "When did those concerns begin?" "Approximately 8 months before his death." Evelyn's head snapped up. "What specifically concerned him?" I asked. Bernard's voice remained steady. "Funds were being rerouted through intermediary entities without his direct authorization. Offshore accounts, trust vehicles that were not part of the original estate plan." Gregory stood again. "Objection. Hearsay." "Overruled," Judge Whitmore said. "This witness has direct knowledge." Bernard continued. "Mr. Hale believed someone was accelerating transfers while his health was declining." "Did he identify who?" I asked. "Yes." Bernard turned slightly. "His wife and her legal counsel." The room exhaled in one sharp breath. Serafina whispered something frantic to Evelyn, but Evelyn didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on Bernard now, cold and calculating. "Mr. Clay," Gregory interjected, unable to stop himself, Isn't it true that you were dismissed shortly after these so-called concerns arose? Bernard turned to him. Yes. And isn't it also true that you were dismissed for insubordination? No, Bernard replied. I was dismissed because I refused to execute a transfer without Mr. Hale's written approval. Gregory's face flushed. That is your interpretation. No, Bernard said calmly. That is documented. I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward the bailiff. Exhibit C. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. What is this document? A wire transfer authorization dated 3 weeks before my father's death, I said. Signed by Gregory Vanton, not signed by Richard Hale. Gregory stood so fast his chair tipped backward. That document is privileged. It's fraudulent, I said quietly. Judge Whitmore examined the page, then looked up slowly. Mr. Vanton, did you authorize this transfer? Gregory opened his mouth, closed it. I acted under implied authority. Implied by whom? The judge asked. Gregory glanced at Evelyn. She didn't move. Bernard spoke again. That transfer moved $12 million into a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Whitmore slammed the gavel. Order! I took a breath. Mr. Clay, was this an isolated incident? No, Bernard said. There were multiple transfers. All followed the same pattern. And were these entities disclosed in the final trust amendments? I asked. No. Gregory's confidence collapsed in real time. He shuffled papers, searching for something that would save him. Mr. Clay, I continued, did my father instruct you to preserve evidence related to these transactions? Yes. How? He required all mirrored backups to be stored independently and encrypted. And did he say why? Bernard's voice softened. He said, if they succeed in making me disappear on paper, at least the truth will still exist somewhere. Evelyn's hand trembled for the first time. Gregory objected weakly. Speculation, emotional testimony. Judge Whitmore ignored him. Ms. Hale, continue. I nodded. Mr. Clay, did my father ever express fear regarding his safety? Bernard hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Yes. The room froze. He believed the pressure wasn't just financial, Bernard said. He believed time was being used against him. Serafina gasped. That's absurd. Judge Whitmore turned his gaze on her. One more outburst and you will be removed. She fell silent. No further questions, I said. Gregory stumbled to his feet. Cross-examination. He approached Bernard like a man approaching a cliff edge, forced by momentum more than strategy. Mr. Clay, Gregory said sharply, you were dismissed. You were angry. Isn't it possible your testimony is motivated by resentment? No, Bernard said. It's motivated by obligation. To whom? Gregory snapped. To the man who trusted me, Bernard replied, and to the company he didn't want looted. Gregory's voice rose. You expect this court to believe a decades-long conspiracy based on your word and a few documents? Bernard met his stare. No, I expect this court to believe numbers. Silence. Gregory's shoulders slumped slightly. No further questions. Bernard stepped down, and as he passed me, he whispered, he would have been proud. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved right away. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her face a mask carved from porcelain. Serafina stared straight ahead, eyes glassy. Gregory retreated into whispered arguments with himself. In the hallway, reporters surged, but court security held them back. Bernard and I stood near a window overlooking the city. They're bleeding now, Bernard said, but wounded animals do dangerous things. I know, I replied. This isn't over. No, he agreed. It's just getting expensive. When we returned, Judge Whitmore addressed the room with a tone that made even Gregory straighten. Based on today's testimony, he said, this court finds sufficient cause to expand the scope of discovery. All offshore entities, shell companies, and trust vehicles connected to Hale Dominion are subject to immediate disclosure. Evelyn's head turned sharply. Your Honor, sit down, the judge said. This court will not be blindfolded. He turned to me. Ms. Hale, your actions have raised serious questions. Be aware that this path will not lead back to comfort. I met his gaze. I didn't come here for comfort. The gavel fell. As the room dissolved into motion again, I felt the weight of what had shifted. Not triumph, not relief, momentum. For the first time, the power in that courtroom wasn't inherited, purchased, or borrowed. It was earned, and I could feel it pulling the truth closer, whether they liked it or not. The next move came quietly, which was how I knew it mattered. No emergency motions, no dramatic objections, just a sealed filing submitted after hours, buried under routine procedural language. Gregory Vanton had learned something over the last few days. When noise failed, subtlety followed. Bernard noticed it first. They're shifting strategy, he said the morning of the 5th day, standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. This filing isn't about money. I scanned the document again. It's about me. Yes. They're not trying to beat the evidence anymore, I said slowly. They're trying to make me disappear from the process. Bernard nodded. They're requesting the court appoint a guardian ad litem. Temporary, they'll say. Neutral, they'll say. But once that happens, you lose your voice. I closed my eyes for a moment. This was familiar territory. Not the legal maneuvering, but the intention behind it. Control by concern. Erasure by protection. They're framing it as care, I said, as if they're worried about my well-being. They've always been worried, Bernard replied, just not in the way that helps. By the time we arrived at the courthouse, the filing had already leaked. Not the details, just the premise. Reporters whispered about mental health, about stress, about whether grief had clouded my judgment. I kept my head up as I walked past them, cameras flashing, questions shouted that I didn't answer. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt different again, heavier, more personal. Evelyn sat perfectly composed, a soft expression of maternal concern arranged carefully on her face. She wore pale blue, the color she always chose when she wanted to look gentle. Serafina mirrored her posture, though the tension in her jaw gave her away. Gregory stood as soon as the judge entered. Your Honor, he began, this motion is made with the utmost reluctance and concern. Ms. Hale has endured significant emotional distress following her father's death. Combined with her decision to proceed without counsel, we believe the court has an obligation to ensure her interests are properly safeguarded. I stayed seated. Gregory continued, We are requesting the temporary appointment of a guardian ad litem to assist Ms. Hale in navigating these complex proceedings. Temporary, assist, safeguard. Every word chosen carefully. Judge Whitmore turned to me. Ms. Hale, your response? I stood. I am not asking the court to protect me, I said. I am asking the court to hear me. Gregory shook his head slightly. This is not about silencing you. It's about ensuring fairness. No, I said calmly. It's about taking away my agency when you couldn't take away my evidence. Evelyn sighed softly, shaking her head. Miranda, this isn't healthy. You've been under so much strain. The sound of my name from her mouth still carried weight. Old habits die hard. Ms. Hale, the judge said, this motion requires the court to consider whether you can adequately represent your own interests. I can, I said. Based on what? I took a breath. This was the moment they had been building toward. The place where doubt would creep in if I let it. Based on the fact that every significant claim I've made has been supported by documentation, I said. Based on the fact that attempts to discredit me have coincided precisely with the introduction of evidence that threatens the respondents. Gregory interjected. Correlation is not causation. No, I agreed, but patterns are rarely accidents. The judge studied me. Ms. Hale, the court must consider whether grief or stress has impaired your judgment. I won't deny grief, I said. But grief doesn't fabricate wire transfers, forged authorizations, or undisclosed offshore entities. A murmur moved through the gallery. "Your Honor," Gregory said sharply, "this is turning into a platform for unverified accusations." I turned to him. "Then let's verify them." Silence. I reached into my bag and removed a slim folder, placing it on the table. "I would like to call Dr. Leonard Harris." Gregory froze. The judge looked surprised. "Who is Dr. Harris?" "My father's independent physician," I said. "Not affiliated with the hospital where he was treated, not recommended by family counsel." Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "That doctor was dismissed." "Yes," I said, "after he refused to sign a competency report requested by your attorney." Gregory stood abruptly. "This is highly inappropriate." "Sit down," the judge said. "Ms. Hale, is this witness present?" "Yes." Dr. Harris entered the courtroom looking uncomfortable, a man unused to spectacle. He took the oath with trembling hands. "Dr. Harris," I began, "how long did you treat my father?" 5 years. "Were you consulted during the period when his estate documents were amended?" "Yes." "Did you ever diagnose him as cognitively impaired?" "No." "Did anyone ask you to?" Dr. Harris hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Who?" "Mr. Vanton." The sound that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like something snapping. Gregory surged to his feet. "Objection, this is a lie." "Dr. Harris," the judge said calmly, "answer the question." "He asked me to evaluate Mr. Hale for diminished capacity," Dr. Harris said. "When I refused, I was informed my services were no longer required." Evelyn whispered something frantic to Serafina. "Did you ever observe signs that would justify removing my father's decision-making authority?" I asked. "No." "Did you believe he understood the nature and consequences of his actions?" "Yes." I nodded. "Thank you." Gregory's cross-examination was short and clumsy. He tried to suggest bias, personal resentment, professional embarrassment. None of it landed. When Dr. Harris stepped down, the courtroom felt unbalanced, as if gravity itself had shifted. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Mr. Vanton, this court is troubled." Gregory said nothing. "Repeated efforts to undermine the petitioner's credibility," the judge continued, "combined with evidence suggesting those efforts were strategic rather than protective, raise serious concerns." He turned to me. "Ms. Hale, the motion for a guardian ad litem is denied." Evelyn's shoulders sagged visibly. "Furthermore," the judge added, "the court will consider sanctions should similar motions be filed without substantial basis." Gregory swallowed. The gavel came down. As we exited the courtroom, Evelyn caught up to me in the hallway. For the first time, she dropped the performance. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed. "You're tearing everything apart." I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who had orchestrated my exclusion with a smile and a hand on my shoulder. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm making sure the truth doesn't need permission." Serafina stood a few steps back, watching us with wide eyes. For the first time, she didn't look triumphant. She looked uncertain. Bernard joined me as we walked away. "They lost that round badly." "Yes," I said, "and now they're afraid." "Of what?" I thought of my father's notes, the recordings, the patterns emerging piece by piece. "Of what comes next?" I said. Outside, the city moved on as it always did. Cars honked, people hurried past, life indifferent to private wars. But somewhere beneath the noise, the ground was still shifting, and they could feel it. By the 6th day, the court no longer felt like a place where arguments were made. It felt like a place where truths were excavated. The morning light filtered through the high windows in pale, indifferent beams, illuminating dust motes drifting above polished wood and stone. I arrived earlier than usual, not because I needed more time, but because I needed stillness. What lay ahead was no longer about strategy. It was about exposure. Bernard joined me silently, placing a thin stack of documents on the table between us. This is where they stop pretending, he said quietly. Once this comes out, they can't reframe it as misunderstanding or family conflict. I looked at the top page. Transaction summaries, account numbers. Dates aligned too cleanly to be coincidence. They moved faster than they should have, I said. That's always the mistake. Bernard nodded. People who believe they're untouchable don't slow down. Across the room, Evelyn entered with Serafina at her side. They didn't sit immediately. Evelyn scanned the courtroom, eyes sharp, calculating exits that weren't physical. Gregory arrived last, jaw clenched, carrying far fewer binders than before. The weight he carried now wasn't paper. Judge Whitmore took the bench without ceremony. "We are resuming proceedings," he said. "Ms. Hale, you may continue." I stood. "Your Honor," I began, "today I intend to address the issue of concealed assets." Gregory exhaled sharply through his nose, but stayed seated. "These assets are not speculative," I continued. "They are documented, traceable, and deliberately structured to remain outside the declared estate." I placed the first document into evidence. "Exhibit D," I said, "a corporate registry filing from the Cayman Islands." The bailiff passed copies forward. "This entity, Blue Meridian Holdings," I said, "was established 18 months before my father's death. Its listed director is a nominee service. Its beneficial owner is undisclosed." Gregory rose halfway. "Many corporations use nominee structures." "Indeed," I said, "which is why this alone would mean nothing." I turned the page. Exhibit E wire transfer records from Hale Dominion's treasury account into Blue Meridian Holdings, totaling $34 million over 11 transactions. A murmur rippled through the gallery. "These transfers were not disclosed in the trust amendments," I said, "nor were they approved by the board." Gregory stood fully now. "Objection, these are business expenditures." "Then let's talk about timing," I replied. I clicked a button, and the screen behind me lit up with a timeline. "Each transfer coincides with a medical event involving my father," I said. "Hospitalization, sedation, periods when he was physically present but legally vulnerable." Evelyn's fingers curled into her purse. "Mr. Clay," I said, "can you confirm whether these transfers were flagged internally?" Bernard stood. "Yes, they were marked as irregular." "And what happened to the internal auditor who raised concerns?" I asked. "He was dismissed." Gregory slammed his palm against the table. "Enough. This is inflammatory." Judge Whitmore's gaze cut to him. "Sit down," I continued. "These assets were not hidden for tax efficiency," I said. "They were hidden to prevent scrutiny." I turned toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Hale," I said calmly, "are you familiar with Blue Meridian Holdings?" Evelyn stiffened. "No." "Have you ever authorized transfers to that entity?" "No." "Have you ever discussed it with Gregory Vanton?" "No." Gregory jumped in. "My client has answered." "Yes," I said. "She has." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to call a forensic accountant." A man in his 40s took the stand, composed, professional. He introduced himself as Daniel Reese. "Mr. Reese," I said, "did you review the financial materials related to Hale Dominion at my request?" "Yes." "What was your conclusion?" "That substantial assets were diverted into off-book structures." "Was there any legitimate business justification documented?" "No." Gregory attempted to cross-examine, but his questions lacked teeth. Mr. Reese answered calmly, methodically dismantling every alternative explanation. When he stepped down, the room felt heavier, as if gravity itself had increased. I wasn't finished. "Your Honor," I said, "these concealed assets matter not only because they alter the estate, but because of where they went next." I placed another document into evidence. Exhibit F Property Deeds. I looked directly at Serafina for the first time that day. "These properties," I said, "were purchased under the name Serafina Hale." Serafina's head snapped up. "That's a lie." Judge Whitmore raised a hand. Ms. Hale, you will remain silent. The funds used to purchase these properties, I continued, originated from Blue Meridian Holdings. Serafina stood abruptly. I didn't know where the money came from. Evelyn reached for her, but it was too late. Ms. Hale, the judge said sharply, sit down. Serafina sank back into her chair, face pale. Gregory's voice trembled as he rose. Your Honor, even if these allegations are accurate, they do not establish wrongdoing by my clients. They establish concealment, the judge replied, which this court takes seriously. I took a breath. This was the edge. Your Honor, I said, there is one final element. The room went still. These transactions were not only hidden, I said, they were rushed. I turned back to the screen. 3 days before my father's death, I continued, an irrevocable trust was activated, one that transferred remaining liquid assets out of Hale Dominion's direct control. Gregory's face drained of color. That trust, I said, was executed while my father was sedated. Evelyn whispered, No. Mr. Clay, I asked, did my father approve that activation? No. Was he conscious? No. The silence was absolute. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, hands braced on the bench. Ms. Hale, he said slowly, are you alleging that your father's incapacity was exploited to finalize these transfers? Yes, I said, I am. Gregory spoke then, his voice no longer smooth. This is a civil proceeding. She is veering into criminal insinuation. The judge didn't look at him. This court is no longer comfortable treating this matter as routine, Judge Whitmore said. The evidence presented today suggests potential financial crimes. Evelyn's breath came shallow and fast now. Serafina stared at the table as if it might swallow her. I am ordering the immediate preservation of all financial records, the judge continued, and I am referring these findings to the appropriate authorities for review. Gregory stood, panic breaking through. Your Honor! Sit down, the judge said, his voice iron. You have had ample opportunity to explain. You chose instead to deflect. The gavel came down, loud and final. As the room erupted in hushed chaos, I remained standing. This was the line, the one you couldn't step back from. Bernard leaned close. Once federal eyes get involved, he whispered, there's no quiet ending. I know, I said. Evelyn finally looked at me then, not with anger, not with contempt, with fear. As we left the courtroom, reporters surged forward, shouting questions about offshore accounts and hidden trusts. I didn't answer. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, the city holding its breath. I thought of my father, of the careful way he documented everything, knowing no one would protect him but truth itself. They thought this was about inheritance. They were wrong. This was about what happens when power assumes no one is watching. And now, everyone was. The silence that greeted me on the 7th day was different. It wasn't the wary quiet of people bracing for impact, or the tense hush of a room waiting to be entertained. It was heavier than that, settled, like the air just before something irreversible happens. No one smiled when I entered. Gregory Vanton sat stiffly at the defense table, his tie slightly off-center, fingers drumming once against a legal pad before he forced them still. Evelyn kept her eyes down, studying a document she had already read a dozen times. Serafina looked smaller somehow, her shoulders drawn in, confidence leaking out through the cracks she could no longer hide. They weren't preparing arguments anymore. They were preparing themselves. Bernard leaned toward me as I took my seat. They didn't sleep, he murmured. Neither did Gregory. I know, I said quietly. He's running out of places to hide. Judge Whitmore entered without delay. No small talk, no warnings. He looked like a man who had already made a decision to follow the evidence wherever it led, even if he didn't like the destination. Ms. Hale, he said after the bailiff called the room to order, you may proceed. Gregory stood immediately. Your Honor, before the petitioner continues her narrative, The respondents wish to address a critical issue. The word narrative landed like an insult disguised as professionalism. This court has heard a series of dramatic claims, Gregory continued, many hinging on selective documents and emotional testimony. We believe it is now necessary to revisit the petitioner's reliability as a narrator of events. I didn't move. Gregory turned toward me, his voice sharpening. Ms. Hale has repeatedly framed routine corporate and medical decisions as conspiracies, patterns where none exist, intent where none can be proven. He faced the judge. At this point, Your Honor, the court must consider whether these allegations stem from objective evidence or from unresolved psychological distress. Evelyn lifted her head just enough to look concerned. Serafina swallowed hard. Judge Whitmore's gaze flicked to me. Ms. Hale? I stood slowly. For days, I said, they've tried to disprove documents. I looked directly at Gregory. Now they're trying to disprove me. Gregory scoffed. That's a convenient interpretation. No, I said, it's a predictable one. I turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I don't need opinions. I don't need character assessments. I have my father's voice. The room reacted before anyone spoke. Chairs shifted. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. Gregory shot to his feet. Absolutely not. Judge Whitmore raised a hand. On what grounds are you objecting, Mr. Vanton? Foundation, Gregory said quickly. Authentication, relevance. This is a civil proceeding, not a stage for recorded theatrics. It's relevant, I said calmly, because they're accusing me of imagining things my father explicitly warned me about. The judge studied me. Ms. Hale, explain the origin of this recording. My father made it, I said, in his home, on his own device, because he was afraid. Gregory laughed, sharp and dismissive. Afraid of what, exactly? His own wife? I didn't look at him. Afraid of being erased while still alive. The judge leaned forward. Does this recording directly address the claims raised today? Yes. Does it reference his mental state? Yes. Does it identify specific individuals? Yes. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Play it, Judge Whitmore said. Gregory's face drained of color. The bailiff crossed the room and connected the drive. The faint click of the speakers activating sounded louder than it should have. Then my father's voice filled the space. If this recording exists in a courtroom, Richard Hale said evenly, it means something has gone wrong. Evelyn's breath caught audibly. I am making this statement while fully aware of my actions, my father continued. I am not confused. I am not impaired. And I am not changing my estate because I want to. Serafina's eyes widened. I have been pressured, he said, repeatedly, by my wife, by her attorney, to accelerate decisions I do not agree with. Gregory shook his head, whispering, No. I am being told that my daughter Miranda is unstable, my father said, that she cannot be trusted, that she should be removed from influence. I felt my chest tighten. That is false, he continued. She is the only one asking why the timing doesn't make sense. The recording paused for a moment, then resumed. If anything happens to me, my father said quietly, it will not be because my heart failed. It will be because I became inconvenient. The silence afterward was suffocating. Judge Whitmore slowly removed his glasses. Gregory stood, voice strained. Your Honor, this recording is deeply troubling, but it proves nothing. Fear is not evidence. I spoke before the judge could respond. Then let's hear the rest. Gregory spun toward me. There is no rest. Yes, I said. There is. I nodded to the bailiff. The second recording played. I've been advised to sign documents while sedated, my father said. They tell me it's routine, that it's temporary. It isn't. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. They are rushing, he said, because once the trust becomes irrevocable, I won't be able to undo it. And they know I won't sign it if I'm fully conscious. Serafina whispered, "Mom?" "I don't trust Gregory anymore," my father continued, "and I no longer trust my wife to protect my interests." The judge sat upright. "If you are hearing this," my father said, "please understand, any claim that I was confused is a lie." The recording ended. The courtroom felt hollow, like something had been torn out of it. Gregory stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Judge Whitmore's voice was low when he spoke. "Mr. Vanton, did you advise your client to sign estate documents while under sedation?" Gregory swallowed. "I advised him on legal efficiencies." "That is not what I asked." Evelyn stood abruptly. "Your Honor, Richard was ill. He was scared. He said things he didn't mean." I turned toward her. "Did he mean it when he warned you not to rush?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "He didn't understand the urgency." "The urgency of what?" I asked. She faltered. Serafina rose suddenly. "Stop it! This isn't fair!" Judge Whitmore raised his voice. "Sit down." Serafina sank back into her chair, tears welling. Gregory finally found his voice. "Your Honor, even if these recordings are authentic, they do not establish wrongdoing. They establish anxiety." "They establish foreknowledge," the judge replied, "and intent." He turned to me. "Ms. Hale, you are no longer implying. You are alleging." "Yes," I said. "I am alleging that my father's decline was exploited." Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. "This court cannot ignore that." He paused, then said words that changed the temperature of the room completely. "I am expanding the scope of this proceeding," he announced. "The circumstances surrounding Richard Hale's death will be reviewed." Evelyn gasped. Gregory stumbled back into his chair. "I am also ordering preservation of all medical records," the judge continued, "and notifying the appropriate authorities." The gallery erupted in whispers. Serafina covered her face with her hands. Evelyn leaned toward Gregory, her voice shaking. This was never supposed to be played. Gregory didn't answer. As the gavel struck, I felt something inside me shift. Not relief, not triumph, resolve. They had buried his voice, sealed it behind legal language, and polite